next speaker is got a very, very interesting topic. It's called Drive Towards ODF. Now, I'm not going to tell you what ODF stands for. That's the secret for this particular session. So Drive Towards ODF, how technology helps. And it's going to be presented by a long-term friend, as well as somebody who's done quite a considerable amount of work in this space. So I would like to welcome upon Sarbani Bhattacharya, who's the chair, FINISH Mondial Supervisory Board. Sarbani started her career from the hinterland backwaters of India and central India, and she's worked at several different leadership positions in both sort of small companies, but also large companies. She has worked with Unilever, and then she was also with KPMG, and before joining or diving deep into this space of social impact. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Sarbani Bhattacharya.
Hi, good morning. Hello, can you see me?
Yes, I think let's get the audience to say yes, they can by typing it in the chat. So if you guys can hear Sarbani well, then please type in yes in the chat box.
Hey, there are enough yeses, so let me just start. Thanks for that introduction, Anirban. Happy to be here and happy to share some of these experiences with you. Well, I currently work for a very high-tech company called HCL Technologies. And whenever I make presentations like this, my only sort of prayer is that there's no big technical hitch that kind of either messes up or leverages the impact of my presentation. Hopefully we shall see the presentation soon. I think I'm dependent on technology to do that. Can you see the presentation, or shall I start? We have enough yeses and highs and lots of people who probably know more about this topic than me, so that makes me a bit nervous. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question. Can you please put down in your chat, what do you think is the most powerful technology launched in the last 50 years? Come on, everybody, this is supposed to be an interactive session. I'm sure you have some views on what is technology. Okay, I have mobile phones, I have internet, I have AI, I have the computer. Anything original, anything specific to your personal experience or to your country? Okay, so I'm going to go further and share with you some of the answers that I had in a couple of sessions earlier that I attended. Well, somebody said the man on the moon. Somebody said the computer, even from this group. Somebody talked about medicine. I think we've had huge advances in medical technology in the last few years. Email, yeah, those are lots of the answers we get in this group as well. And in one group, one of the answers that we got was the condom, which, if you reflect, coming from the country I come from, was, yeah, indeed, hugely useful technological advancement. And probably had it been used or expanded more, we'd have probably had a different population construct today. And if you see the last line on my slide, it says it's only when things go wrong that machines remind you how powerful they are. Having said that, on a lighter note, I just want to sort of warm up to what is technology, given that I'm one of the first few speakers of this day. The big thing seems to be the self-drive options. And I think one of the larger reasons that technology still is years away is because of the possible social impact it could have. There are huge ethical impacts of having self-drive machines, because you're actually replacing a human hunch, human reactions, spontaneous reactions to those that are computerized. So, the car has to be programmed to decide whether it would choose to bang into 20 other cars to avoid a child, which normally is a knee-jerk reaction of the human mind. Huge, a very different kind of impact on society if you also think about the number of people then who will start driving. Mortality has changed very, very significantly. I'm going to share some data points here. This has seemed to be one of the largest impacts of medical technology. It has gone up from 64.2 years, 2 years in 1990 to 72.6 years in 2019. Deforestation has been hugely impacted. You actually had way back in 2015 Google Forests, which powered maps to fight deforestation, and the Forest Watch was a mapping platform supported by Google using technology to actually keep an eye on forests. It would be great if this could be applicable in the space of sanitation, and I'll tell you some more about it a bit later. Financial inclusion has also had a huge impact on society given the use of technology. A clear example that immediately comes to mind is the M-Pesa that's used in Kenya, where they've kind of leapfrogged the whole banking system and actually served the underserved communities by using a mobile phone for banking applications. To get to my topic, I was going to take time to ask the audience what is ODF, but when I saw the profile of the audience I decided not to do it. ODF is a concept, it's a term, it's actually a measurement unit to measure open defecation free. This comes from the fact that one of the largest issues that the world faces today is the fact that more than 1 billion people still defecate outdoors. That results in huge disease and, of course, deaths. There are lots of other things. This is a map which gives you some basic numbers, but you can see up front that India, China, Africa, and parts of South America are the worst hit by this. And it's interesting to note that it's not just a factor of economics, but a lot of social, cultural, and awareness factors play in this fact. There are also other data points like 2.2 billion people do not have access to safe drinking water. Double that, almost 4.2 go without safe sanitation, and about 3 billion lack basic hand washing facilities. The impact of all of this on the longer term health parameters of the population are far more than just simple hygiene or, an ugly situation to be in. So that comes to the point of how can technology really help. I will take you through some of the things that I am aware of and have been exposed to because of this non-executive role I do with FINISH Mondial. The purpose of this presentation, however, more than sharing with you what is the technology that's currently used to sort of overcome this issue, is to throw out there some level of awareness of how deep rooted and how serious this problem is, and also to hopefully garner some ideas and support in terms of what are the kind of technologies that can be leveraged to improve positive impacts on this. The organization I work for was started in India, and India remains one of the flagship countries. One, because it has the largest open defecation problem in the world by far as a country, and two, because it seems to have the largest potential in the phase of economic development it's in. The present government, led by Prime Minister Modi, launched something called the Clean Bharat or the Swachharit Mission, specifically targeted against ODF, at least in the first phase. And the claims have been high and many and large, but simply said there are about 92 million toilets and close to 100 million toilets that have been constructed over the last 5 or 6 years across 69 million villages. A Google Maps lists something like 57,000 new public toilets in the cities. And but there's a lot that went around this. One was, of course, the whole scheme of grants and subsidies to build individuals and household toilets. But more than anything else, it created huge awareness about the problems related to open defecation. Close to 600 million people in India alone did not have any access to any kind of toilet in 2008, 2009, about 10 years ago. And while the government claims that all of them do, I mean, I think fair estimates, which have been researched and also documented by several agencies, would pin that number at something like 300 or 350 million even today. In the next 20 minutes, I hope to give you some more color on why this is the case and what needs to be done going forward, because the target of reaching open defecation free, like 100%, is still far, and I don't see any other way other than leveraging technology to get there. Simply said, there were lots of social and cultural barriers. You know, religious sanction talked about throwing stuff outside the house. So as long as it was not in the house, it was okay. And that led to the firm belief that having a toilet inside one's house was a dirty thing to do. There was the added issue of women and the risks they faced because they needed to go into the fields in the dark to find some private spot to do their daily routines. And there've been huge statistics available on issues like rape and murder because of the fact that there was no alternative to open defecation. And the other inhuman practice, which I think can very easily be saved by using technology, was that of manual scavenging. You still had people, you still have even today, sanitation workers carrying feces on their head. I'm not exaggerating, but I want to put the facts out there just to make it a bit more alarming as the reality is, so that it prompts people to take some action. The government did do things about scavenging. It was declared as an illegal offense in 2013, but so far no convictions have been made. I'm just, sorry, I need to introduce FINISH. FINISH stands for Financial Inclusion, which improves sanitation and health. That's sort of the brand. It started off as Finnish Society in India and is now a partnership between Waste, Amref Flying Doctors, and Aqua for All. So it's a consortium, if you like, which I chair the supervisory board of. The partnership really is involved in scaling safe sanitation through public-private partnerships and contributing to mainly the Sustainable Development Goal number 6. To date, over 5 million people have enjoyed the benefits of safe sanitation thanks to the efforts of FINISH. There are lots of data points here. We've constructed more than 1 million toilets. We've put in about 10 million work days in terms of construction workers who make those toilets. We have households that have invested close to 150 million in improving sanitation facilities. And we do have the underlying targets of gender equality and financial inclusion, which I will talk a little bit more of. Back to the ODF situation and India and how Finnish leveraged technology to drive social impact. I think it was a fivefold approach to the problem, and I'm going to cover them in this way. So the first one was to reach out to these individuals and households that are scattered over huge areas in these countries that we work in. It was about using the right technology to build these toilets to make them sustainable. It was to raise funds and finance, apart from awareness. It's a constant challenge to keep reinforcing all of this, and I'll share a bit on how technology helps with that. And of course, the final goal, which I think we've only just started contributing to, is the whole piece around recycling the waste that's generated. Achievements have so far largely been a behavioral change. That's been the biggest achievement. We hope to make much more impact in terms of financial inclusion and sustainable change. So on the first one, in terms of reach, it's probably necessary to understand the level of communication. Here again, I use the backdrop of India clearly. There are lots of data points there which simply say that there's an explosion in the access of internet and phone and media, including TV channels. I'm not even talking about the film industry, which has reached and percolated right down to this strata of society where the problem is the largest. this is an interesting visual because this is in fact indeed true. There are probably 300-400 million people in India who have mobile phones but do not have a toilet that they can access. And the reason I think this is probably the first and the most important way in which technology can be leveraged to increase or reach more people is that it's far more effective, cost-effective, and time-wise more efficient. For example, Kilkari, an application that delivers free audio messages on health-related, particularly women's health-related stuff, racked up more than 60 million calls a month. I know we have Namrata who will talk about her Meri Body app soon, and I hope she can also call out numbers that are this big. So simply said, demand generation, one of the largest challenges that Finnish faced or still faces was to create demand for toilets. So people and households needed to feel the need to have a toilet and stop defecating in the open. And that was done through creation of awareness, and financial assistance was greatly leveraged also through technology. This is really a street play. So this was one of the ways in which Finnish communicates to this whole landscape. Yeah, there's a tiny video here which gives you a flavor of how the audience are pulled into something like street plays, which are done in the middle of villages to sort of amplify the problem and take it home. I'll just take a minute to show this to you. I hope it works. Oh, sorry. Now, how do we go back? No, so as I told you, my biggest fear was
it should work with yours.
I need to go back.
Yes, and then click on the reach. Yeah, that one. Yeah, it should start. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, but I don't know if people can see it. It's too small, or hear it. I mean, I can always share it later if somebody's really interested. So I'm just going to go on also for want of time. I told you my biggest fear was a technical hitch. Well, in terms of reach, we also reached out to schools because we felt that children were the largest influencers in homes like this. They were probably the first generation that went to school, and they came back home and insisted on having toilets, which was hugely relevant and hugely powerful tool to get the message home. We've also tried to add on lighting. This is because we've had some successful partnerships, but also because sometimes getting a free solar light, if they made a toilet, acted as a bigger carrot to get the job done than a grant to make the toilet itself. To move on, I think the most technical contribution to these toilets was the design of the toilet itself. And I'm not going to bore you with the details, but there is so much to the way a toilet needs to be made, depending on the water level, depending on the requirements, so how often the toilet is going to be used, what it's going to be used for, and of course the cost parameters around it. That actually today, a lot of the countries, India, but also Kenya, for instance, suffer from the fact that these toilets do not work after a period of time. That's because they're not made in the right way. The picture you see here is a double pit toilet, and there's a specific construction which makes it the most sustainable. I've picked this. We have a lot of technical designs, and I think this was the biggest technical contribution that Finnish made, and also the single reason why we were the most successful in building these toilets. Because in this situation, you do not need to empty these pits. And emptying pits, other than the fact that they are inhuman in the way they are done, they get filled up so fast, and therefore they don't get used, and then they have all the problems associated with not being able to function. The way we achieved this was not just going out there and saying this is how you make the toilet, but we actually did huge mason training programs. Apart from contributing to the creation of mandates in terms of labor created, which didn't exist earlier, they also ensured that the technicality or the way in which the toilet was made it the most sustainable and also the most cost effective. Finnish has a huge sort of collection of best practices around this, which are shared around the world, and a lot of learning, which makes us sort of technically superior to constructors who just make toilets which then never get used. I also wanted to make the point that in a lot of these areas, there are no drainage systems and the infrastructure is not likely to catch up with the requirement for toilets, which is fairly immediate. So the fact that these are standalone units, you sort of bypass the fact that this terrain does not have drains. The whole thing about having technology involved in this whole enterprise has a lot of added benefits, which are sort of backloaded. There's a whole preventive health system that comes along with the fact that toilets are being used, which means there is no open defecation. And that sort of scenario is a basic necessity to even start thinking of health insurance schemes. So in the absence of basic hygiene parameters, such as the use of proper toilets, it is almost impossible to sell the idea of health insurance. And that is the reason why most of these parts of the population do not have any kind of health insurance whatsoever. And if they do, then they are very disappointed because it's almost impossible to get any claims passed, given that there are hardly any there's hardly any hospital available, or the fact that there was no preventive health measures that were in place before any illness happened. Finally, I think the use of technology is very relevant as an alternative to manual scavenging. And as I told you before, this is an ad which came out I think early this year. So we're actually advertising for Scavengers. This was from the Gujarat Subordinate Service Selection, which actually says that somebody needs to have gone through high school to apply for this job. So that is a real problem. And I think India has still not found the investment in technology to get over that. But I'll give you an example of Kenya, where that has really been the focus of the government, and most of the grants are seen there. So in Kenya, the problem is slightly different. It's not open defecation like in India, but they have this concept of flying toilets, where residents relieve themselves into plastic bags and then hurl them out of the door. This is really true and happens even today in a large part of the population. Only 30% of Kenyans have access to improved sanitation. And you actually have an army of people called froggers who then empty these bags or these long drop toilets into the river. Yeah, that is a honeysucker, but the one that I'm talking about is this one, which is simple technology, a little more sophisticated than a normal truck, which could at least alleviate a lot of human suffering that these scavengers go through. The next part, and probably the last part of my presentation, is the funding. And as the presenter before me also mentioned, that technology has made a huge impact in the whole financial space. The banking landscape in India has also changed tremendously with the opening of accounts. This is a Jan Dhan Yojana scheme. I'm not going to give you a lot of information on the scheme because that's not the purpose of it, but I just wanted to lay out that the fact that digital payments and digital banking is growing in India. The concept is, of course, far behind the numbers that you see out here. So though almost 400 million accounts have been opened in the last 6 or 7 years, it is still a long way away from them being used, because the people who open these accounts, firstly, are physically not located close to them, and secondly, do not understand or are able to leverage the benefits of these accounts being opened. One of the reasons the grants given by the government on making toilets in India did not actually reach the targets was because they were not channeled through such accounts, but they went through a huge number of subsidiaries and a huge number of intermediaries. The reason that this is extremely significant is because it creates a huge impact in the lending systems available in these areas. So if we're talking about 500 or 600 million underserved banking individuals, underserved from the perspective of banking, that is a huge market to tap. And not just in terms of grants, but also in terms of their ability to take on loans and get involved into formal commercial lending loops. Finnish has made quite a bit of a start in this whole area in terms of the way we have financed a lot of these toilets. Before I get into that, I'd like to get the audience back into this. If some of you have fallen asleep, can you please put down on your chat what you think impact investing means? Is it investment in specific sustainable projects? Is it investment in reducing the negative impact of climate change? Or is it investment where returns are linked to specific outcomes?
Yeah, the polling is on, so people should be able to cast their votes. Yeah, about 50% of the people have already voted. Let's wait for a few more seconds. So we are about to close the poll in the next 10 seconds. So if you haven't voted, please vote now. All right, thank you so much for joining the poll. And now, Sarbani, if you want, we could share the results.
Yes, please do. I'm curious. Wow, so we have a very informed and educated audience. Well, I think 64% are right and 36% are almost correct. But I think, yeah, so if I get into defining impact investment and that and explaining or justifying why I feel it's more investments that are linked to specific outcomes rather than those of sustainable projects, it's because these are investments where the outcomes are the fundamental reason for the investment. And they are often part of the returns are paid only after outcomes are established. Yeah? Of course, it makes sense to have these investments in sustainable projects, but they're a little more complex than sustainable investments. So this is basically what the Finnish approach was, as I've already explained to you, but I mean, I think we're running out of time, so I'll leave you to go through this later on. But I think the big thing in terms of financing was that we piggybacked on the grant monies we received, largely from the Indian government, from governments all over the world, as well as from donors and corporates. So as I said, till you made a toilet, you didn't get the grant money, particularly in India. And that led us to think about this whole system of trying to lend money to these people. What we were successful in doing was to, of course, mobilize microfinance institutions to do this, because it was extremely critical to get them to start giving what was called non-income generation loans. So it's much easier to loan out money to a family or an individual to buy a cow because you know that that will generate an income to pay back the loan. But in the absence of any kind of credit risk background or risk assessment procedures at that level, it was that much harder to start lending money to these people for non-income generation loans. So it was a combination of convincing the individuals to put in some amount of funds, of self-generated funds or personal contributions, get the local banking systems involved, to support some of these relatively collateral-free loans or lending systems, and get the microfinance institutions excited about this. What still happens very much is that there's a lot of grant money which we raise independently that helps leverage this credit funding, because without the effort put in, the credit funding doesn't happen, and it's hugely expensive. And finally, we were able to launch a cross-border finance instrument, which is called the Sanitation Impact Bond by us, wherein we brought in foreign investment into the sector, purely commercial, distributed via the microfinancing system. So it was one of the largest sort of financial innovations seen in the space, and also a huge fillip to Finnish to carry on financing the construction of these toilets in the absence of the government grant schemes. Yeah. I don't know if all of this is clear, because it's quite hard to explain it in 5 minutes. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's very different to normal investing because of the outcomes that need to be established. There's a whole piece around definition of outcomes per se. So it could be access to toilets, it could be ownership, it could be usage, it could be the number of toilets in an area or the population covered. You also need to look at what we call slippage rates, that is people who have toilets but then go back to open defecation. There are concepts and formulas to identify or to judge what is open defecation free. So there has to be a very high percentage of population that has toilets and uses toilets. Of course, it has a lot to do with the time period involved and the eventual health outcomes, which is still an ambition we have, in the sense that that's really hard to measure up front. All of this would get a huge fillip if technology could be used to leverage this, right from assessment of risk to mitigation of risk. We have now apps like Robo Advisory, for instance, which does, an online assessment of credit, particularly in markets like this when there isn't a huge credit history. So what are the things they look at? Things like ownership of house or home or room, and things like that. There's a whole piece around communication, which, if we use technology, could be far better led. I mean, using a phone to make a picture of a toilet or a home or a site, and doing all of that online would be far more cost effective than sending a person out there to assess it and advise on it. And of course, the cost parameters of impact investing, particularly cross-border, are extremely high. So it has to be a minimum quantum of money that's invested to make it worthwhile in the first place. And then you have this whole exercise of distributing this many, many, many times over. Right? So 100 million would reach like 10,000 villages across 5,000 kilometers, which is very much needs a high level of technology to make that happen. I think this is the part which I will leave you at. I'll rush you quickly through the other two things, which again are more futuristic, and I would love feedback or also inputs on how in any of these areas technology could be better leveraged to increase impact. Okay, so now, so as I said, we need to constantly reinforce it's okay, we missed that slide. And the big piece that one is really working towards is around recycling. We've already started. I mean, in India, there's the huge piece around cleaning water bodies, which are all related to the whole ultimate health outcomes of water and sanitation. Making compost or doing other things with fecal sludge management, as we call it. We've started this in the south of India, where we're actually making compost and selling it back to the farmers who contributed the human excreta in the first place. It's quite unimaginable in a country where feces is such a dirty word, that you actually now have farmers using compost made out of this. And finally, of course, fuel generation. There are several projects here where you really need technology to make that happen and to really convert waste into gold. So I think comes to my my final slide, where key success factors is the size. The size of the pie is very high, but that needs a huge amount of investment, initial investment, to actually target it, and it's a sort of a critical mass issue. So the numbers get balanced by the investment only if it's large enough. There's a need for speed of execution, because otherwise we keep taking 3 steps backwards for every step forward, and then the ultimate impact is not seen. Of course, cost is always an issue when you talk about technology. Sustainability is key today, because as you can see in both Kenya and India, there are lots of toilets that have been built, but very few of them are being used, and an even fewer number of people really believe that open defecation is not on. And that's what you're targeting at this point. And all of this really has to be built on a scenario of political and commercial appetite. I'd like to quote from the director of the Wash Institute, which says that the construction is the easy part. We build hundreds of toilets, but the major focus is teaching people that the toilet is not hardware, but software. Yeah, so with that, I'd like to close. I already see lots of questions here, so Anirban, maybe you want to help me on which ones are the burning questions and which ones I can take later?
Sure, absolutely. I think especially your last 2 pages kind of reflect upon a lot of the questions which are there as well. So I'll start with the one which is probably the most relevant on your last page. How do you get investors from developed market interested in a social problem like this?
Okay, that's not a huge challenge. So I think, given the current, the environment being so conscious about corporate social responsibility, the agenda on climate change being so high, and the focus on the SDGs. So this kind of covers 3 or 4 SDGs. I would say 3, 6, 9 to begin with. There are lots of investors that really want to get into this market, 1, to make a difference, 2, because it is the politically correct thing to do, 3, because even legally, to some extent, they need to show that they're doing things here, and 4 is because I think the world over, people are now really concerned about social problems like this, and I think also globalization makes problems in India, China, Kenya, far more real for the developed world. Those days are gone when you can sit back and say, oh, that's bloody India, who cares? You just really need to care, because it affects everybody. I mean, COVID, for example, I really didn't want to go there, but it shows you that, every part of this world has an influence on the rest of the world. So I don't think that's a big issue. I think the problem is that when you talk about investors and not philanthropists or charity, you're talking about a return. You need to be able to give a reasonable return, whether it's from a developed market or within India itself, right? And that is the problem, because it is so expensive to distribute these funds, both to bring them into India or China or Kenya or wherever, look at the exchange risk covers that cost money, to look at the intermediaries that cost money, and to come up with a model that is commercially viable is the real challenge. Impact investing, the world over, I still have to see an example. I mean, we use impact investing for things like rehabilitation of drug addicts, of adult education. You see it for, recovered prisoners, for instance, in the US, has classically been part of impact investing. For all of this, commercial returns are few and far between. most of them are either funded by charities or at least subsidized. So the model we take now is that we look at subsidized investment. So our return is slightly less than what a commercial return is, and we guarantee the outcome. Does that answer?
I think that's a very, very important point that you bring in, because right now the world still kind of operates in silos. With on one side you've got the sort of the subsidy, on the other side the commercial angle, and which is why perhaps the problem, like this open deification across the globe, especially in the war-torn and the areas of of the world, whether it's in Africa or in Asia. Also, it's whether it's war or whether it's a pandemic, not just COVID-19, but the whole Ebola middle sort of section of Africa. I mean, they, people there also have the same problem, but nobody would invest or go after projects in those countries. So I think the point that you raise is quite good. And in fact, that there is a question which does relate to the funding, which is it ethical to combine grant money with commercial funding?
Well, that's something I've been grappling with for a while, because money is fungible, right? So if you look at it from a purely ethical angle, I take money from two sources. One source, I give them a return, because otherwise I wouldn't get the money. And the other source, they give me the money for nothing. In fact, the principal is even not paid back. To answer your question, no, it's not. But is it practical to combine grant money with commercial funding? Yes, because grant money on its own would not be able to make the impact that you do when you combine it. And that's the whole idea of leverage, right? So I'm saying, if I was to use grant money to probably give 5,000 people a new phone, and then use that phone to get them into a lending network for commercial finance, I'm far better off than if I lent out that the money for the 5,000 phones, or I did not combine the two. So the idea is always to do 2 + 2 is more than 4, and that's what makes it then ethical.
I think you've also, yes, I think you've also mentioned this particular question. You've answered, or you've addressed it to some extent, but I'll say it anyways. When it comes to creating awareness about this issue, there usually is an existence of deep-rooted beliefs and superstitions. Especially, I know, in the market that you're talking about. How do you overcome, or have you got experience in overcoming that specific aspect of where people are more superstitious of, not using toilet versus, openly defecating?
Yes, so that's, in fact, it's, the movie, the video clip I had actually is a recording of the communication methods we use. We have a lot of that also in terms of classroom sessions and learning materials, which were actually even put together in an e-learning kind of module or package, which we wanted to distribute through universities, even in Kenya, basically to educate people and overcome such beliefs. A very good example is to put a picture of a god or an idol on a wall where people typically defecate. That is almost where you're using their religious beliefs to achieve your goal. And the other one is really to constantly communicate and reinforce the message that these beliefs and superstitions are coming in the way of progress and is actually causing health issues for them and their family. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Sarbani, I think that these were the questions, and I'm sure some of the people from the audience would like to sort of continue the dialogue. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Oh, they're more than welcome to send me an email or call, or there are websites. I'm happy for you to share the Finnish Mondial website to them. There's a lot of material out there in terms of learnings, in terms of best practices, in terms of funding possibilities. So I'd rather direct you to the website as a start, and then take it from there. I think there's just a lot of information, even in the public domain outside of Finnish Mondial, which would be very relevant if you're interested in how you can add to this drive.
Yeah, thank you so much. In fact, we will share the details. So for the people in the audience, do reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to make that connection. So with that, I would like to especially thank Sarbani for taking out time this morning and sharing your current project. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was my privilege. Thanks. Bye.